Hey y'all, thank you for joining into Teal Talk, where we talk everything intersectional from sexual and domestic violence to race theory and culture. Remember to write any questions in the comments as me and my guests will be answering them live next week. Enjoy. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our very first Teal Talk, where we are going to get into everything intersectionality, gender justice, racial justice, and really have a chance to connect with the people. So today we're going to be discussing engaging men, and we are joined by Jayvon Howard, my esteemed colleague, who we are so grateful to have for our first episode. Jayvon is a passionate organizer and advocate for social justice, serving as a member of the LGBTQ task force with Bravo and the Anti-Oppression Committee with OAESV. He formerly worked as an LGBTQ outreach advocate for Women Helping Women, providing direct services to survivors of domestic, sexual, and stalking violence. Jayvon has a background working with special populations, doing advocacy, outreach, and programming. Jayvon has served on many teams to engage men in gender-based violence, intervention, and prevention, including working with different communities.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to be here and sharing space with you. It's such an honor to be the first guest for the Teal Talks. I'm really excited.
Yes, we are too. So I figure we'll just jump right in. So I first want to know, how did you get into this field and in this work?
So that's a great question. It's everything's always a long story. So I'm not gonna give like the long story. Um, Life is very complicated. Things are really straightforward. I think I spent a lot of time going in and out of different subjects, different kind of volunteering before I really landed here, like permanently. So I've always been social justice oriented ever since I was a kid, always wanting to make a difference in the world, wanting to do something that was like a real radical social change. Always been involved with that. I think I first got started with social justice work with conflict resolution in middle school, and then also in high school, where I was an advanced mediator, where I did trainings for other students for conflict resolution, and we did mediations with students as well, and sometimes with staff, depending on what the circumstance or context was. I think I got specifically involved with work with anti-violence around sexual violence. So everything I've always done has been anti-violence in some capacity, whether it was racial justice or environmental justice. I got into gender justice mostly in college. Um, I think I took a sociology of gender class, which completely just changed my life. Anyone who remembers me during that time, I would not shut up about gender at all. It was something that really I gravitated towards pretty quickly and really easily was able to grasp a lot of the concepts and the theories, particularly around like masculinity and men. That was just something that I really grabbed onto really well. During that same period, I started volunteering for Women Helping Women out in Oxford while I was at Miami University. Um, Kind of just started volunteering because anytime I heard anything about sexual violence throughout my life, it always just felt gross. There was always like this tug at my heartstrings that just really, really deep down just bothered me. And then going to college, you're hearing about sexual violence way more often than you were hearing about it when you're growing up in like middle school or high school. And so one day I just was like, hey, why, instead of me just feeling bad about it, why don't I try to do something? So that's how I got involved with Women Helping Women originally. And then from there, I started getting involved with different orgs on campus. I was actually one of the founding members for the Miami Masculinities Committee. So we did a lot of programming around engaging men, around having conversations around masculinity, about sexual violence, around gender justice. So those are kind of like a lot of that work that I did there. I actually am like a writer at heart. So I kind of shifted from that and I actually applied to work for NPR. I have very limited background in any kind of media and communications and any kind of journalism. I did apply for the Kroc Fellowship, I believe that's what it's called. I got past like the first round of applicants, and again it's like the second round, which was it was super humbling for me to have made it into the second round. I didn't make it past there. Um, and so I decided, with that limited knowledge that I had around media and communications, I really wanted to work for NPR. Then maybe I should shift and go back into something that I have passion for, that I have an expertise in, and grow that expertise, become like a thought leader in that space, really make a social change and a difference, because I want to do that too. But then that would also ultimately lead me to be able to work for NPR, maybe not as a just like as a journalist or a fellow, but maybe as a correspondent or having my own podcast. So it's kind of weird to think that this kind of got started for me wanting to work somewhere else. But I'm very incredibly passionate about the work, and so yeah, so now I'm here, and we'll see where I go.
Very cool. So sociology that was my major in college, and I think it's so interesting that like our exposure to sexual violence and racial violence isn't as in depth until we get to college. So I too woke up in college and completely shifted my perspective. Um, so did you know that like this was even like a position when you were in college? Did you know that like advocacy, like when did you learn about, was it when you started volunteering at Women Helping Women?
Um, so I learned more about like advocacy when I started volunteering with Women Helping Women, for sure. Um, I don't think so. The thing was like this position that I occupy now as engaging men coordinator is a blessing. Uh, Towards the end of my college years, and this is partly why I shifted to like maybe doing writing, or I was considering going down that path, was because I had wished and wanted like for there to be some sort of job where I can just do engaging men work professionally, where I could just talk about gender justice and really engage in that advocacy work and that intervention work. And I wasn't really able to find anything that really matched what I was looking for with what my career aspirations were, with the skills that I had at the time, which have grown since then. But at the time, I was right out of college, pretty limited in certain capacities. I didn't know of anything where I could really get into. So yeah, I went down a path of trying to get into this other place, and then I backtracked, started working with Women Helping Women full time. Um, and through there, I got connected to more of the possibilities, more of the different kind of positions, the different kind of ways you can engage in the work professionally. So that's probably where I really found things.
Yeah. Yeah. I find when people ask me, like, how did you get into this work? I didn't even know that this work existed my whole life. So I
Mm-hmm.
had like that, I want to help, but I don't know how. And like just fell into a really awesome position. So similar stories. I think that's really cool. Um, so you work with engaging men. What does that mean? What is engaging men, especially in the context of gender justice?
Yes, I do get that question a lot. It's actually among a few of my friends and a couple of colleagues. We have this well, it's not really, I don't have the joke. They have an ongoing joke, that I'm kind of like the men helping men advocate, which is not meant to be flattering when they're saying it. So I love this question. I get to clarify, what does it mean to engage men? Um, well, so really, engaging men is about exactly what it says. It's to engage men in the sexual violence movement. So there's two different ways and different roles of doing that. Ultimately, it's about um, being inclusive of all survivors, regardless of gender. And it's also about being inclusive of the fact that when we're doing prevention work, that none of us are innocent. We live in a dominator culture that is white supremacy and patriarchy and where they're rooted in, essentially. And men tend to be the ones who are driving that cultural force, who are at the head of this dominator culture. Uh, with that being said, when we talk about things like intersectionality and when we talk about power and privilege, men are a very difficult demographic to really get to understand their power and understand that privilege and to understand where they fit in the world. A lot of things in in this anti-sexual violence movement, men do not see themselves reflected in that movement. And that's not to say that there's like inherently failings in the movement because of that. It's mainly as a direct consequence of patriarchy itself that they don't see themselves reflected in this movement. So engaging men is really about trying to overcome that obstacle and overcome that barrier by connecting to men, by helping them understand themselves in the movement, how to understand themselves in the movement as survivors and how we talk about survivorship, but also talking about it from that prevention space. Or how do you talk to other men? How do you hold other men accountable? How do you hold yourself accountable? In what ways do you show up as a patriarch? And how can we work to undo that, to create a culture that is not about dominating women and children, boys and girls, and dominating other men.
You said a lot of really awesome things. I want to talk more about men identifying as survivors and what that looks like now versus what the actual rate of men as survivors looks like. Because I think you're right, in this movement, they're excluded a lot when we talk about survivors. So I'm interested to know, like, what do those numbers look like versus how often it's actually happening?
As like we know, because of, I mean, just as like survivors in general, it is the same often with men, where there is this disbelief that always comes in first. There's always this doubt or this suspicion. Collectively, we generally have a narrative around men that, again, they're supposed to be these dominators, and so therefore, they're unrapeable. You can't rape a man. Either they're too strong or too powerful. They should have been able to overpower their attacker. You can't dominate them because they wanted it. Men are always wanting sex, right? They're this hyper promiscuous, hypersexual beings. Like their whole purpose is to just have sex. So how can you dominate someone who has that, right? And then the third like major narrative of kind of going along with that, I'm losing my train of thought. Um, is that again, like they're basically they're unrapeable. I lost the third point that I was about to say. I'm sure it's going to come back to me. Yeah, it happens far more often than we tend to give credit for. Oh, the last one was that you just got lucky. That again, going with that second point where they're hyper promiscuous. That really they're just getting lucky. Man, I would have wished that she did that to me. And that's also a larger issue as well when we talk about like heterosexism, um, assuming that it's always like male, female, man, woman, and that someone cannot be sexually assaulted if they are gay, or someone who's sexually assaulted by a man, um, who sexually assaults another man, that survivor is then now gay themselves in some capacity because of that, or somehow weaker, or way less than because you let like a gay man dominate you. And so there's all these really complicated kind of narratives and perspectives that are going around that act as major barriers that prevent men from coming forward. And it starts very young. It starts as early as boyhood, right? Um, these narratives, these stories, these messages, perspectives, um, they start really early and then they carry that into adulthood. And it can be really damaging.
For sure. Wow, so many good points. Yeah, so it seems like there is we think of rape culture and we think of things that are used against survivors who are women. But it seems like there's a rape culture for men too, that prevents them from being able to identify rape, come forward about rape. That's why, just to be clear, I didn't ask for the stats, because we know that the data is so limited and those stats do not reflect what's actually going on in the world. So thank you so much for that perspective. That's super interesting. So of course, we all know I'm the intersectionality buff, and I always want to talk about how issues intersect. I heard you say that men are hypersexualized, and I'm interested to know, with the white feminist movement, how this movement has kept men out, and why we need a whole position to get them back in.
Yeah, there's there's so much in that question. Um, wow. Yeah, I think the first thing is always just remembering that not all men are created equal. In a global system of oppression, of white supremacy, of patriarchy, of many other isms, which would be a different conversation, um, is not all men are created equal. It's important to understand the variations between like how race plays a role, how class plays a role, um, how gender expression plays a role, language, ability, even geography. All of these are factors that make that difference. And without a full critical analysis of race, of ability, of geography, of all of these things, and only about gender, we end up with a movement and we end up with systems and institutions that are unable to serve everyone. Um, we really need to make sure that we're having that full analysis of all of these different intersections and all these different journeys that people are on, the advantages, the disadvantages, the barriers, the opportunities, the access or lack thereof. Um, I think you bringing up white feminism in particular, and hypersexuality of men at the same time. We talk about like black men, and what does that look like for black men to be seen as hypersexual as men, right? This as a masculine man, you're supposed to be ready to go all the time, and then as black men, our blackness, uh, there's that assumption already that we are these hypersexual beings because we're black. So that intersectionality right there creates an entirely different kind of imagination and fantasy of what a black man is like, as far as predatory behavior, as far as what it looks like to be a pursuer or be an abuser or someone who has been assaulted. Like, just trying to comprehend what that is viewed as, right? And then how that is internalized. And what does that look like then to seek services? What does that look like to be uh, accused? Because we know that accountability looks very different with black men than it does with white men, particularly because of the way that these messages are constructed. It's very complicated.
Mm-hmm. What would perfect prevention look like with men?
Perfect prevention.
Perfect prevention.
um, I mean, ultimately, it comes down to autonomy. And I know that sounds really strange when we're talking about men, men being a very difficult demographic to engage with because, they are the driving forces of patriarchy. But I think we have to also understand that men do not understand that about themselves. That's not our day-to-day daily experience. When I get up in the morning, maybe I want to go take a drive to get some coffee to start the day, and then come home, make breakfast, get, and I'm talking as I work remote. Um, get online, start writing up some papers, some deliverables. Go into some meetings. Maybe go out with my friends after work. Go on a date on the weekend. All of these things are not nefarious. It's really difficult for men to understand, like, oh, I'm just doing day-to-day things. Why am I the villain of the story? And so it starts with just really seeing men not just as men, and boys not just as boys, but see them as people, with real feelings and emotions and thoughts and desires. And they're just doing what anyone would do in the situations that they would be in, of following a path of least resistance to get their needs met, right? So when we talk about like this idea of perfect prevention, starting like in boyhood, it would be that autonomy. It would be allowing men to just be whoever and however they are, without policing, without consequence, with having real emotional, like intelligent dialogue, and teaching them values, teaching them love, compassion, care, communication, all of nurturance, all the things that we want people to have in general, but we don't allow that for men to have. Um, and then we get surprised when they don't have it. So it's about, either deciding what it is that we want. Do we really want them to be these patriarchs that are not vulnerable, or stoic, who are not connected to themselves? And that's what we want. I don't agree, but at least we can stick to it and just allow them to be that. Or we can go a different path and allow them to be full human beings, and imagine the energy and the things that we could create and innovate with that energy if they weren't trying to repress everything and could just express it.
Mm, love it. Love everything you're saying. So how does that tie? We've had so many interesting conversations, you and I want to bring some of that to all of these people. Like, how does that tie into healthy masculinity and what our ideas are about masculinity?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a difficult question, just because I'm still grappling and like kind of rethinking through how I think about masculinity. Um, I think about things often as like large systems, um, and systems generally need to just be abolished or completely transformed for them to be something new. And reformation of any kind of like masculinity, generally is still a masculinity. Um, a healthy masculinity under a patriarchy is still a patriarchal masculinity. So really the conversation, and I think the question should be more so like, how do we change a patriarchal masculinity to not to be a non-patriarchal masculinity? What can we imagine that would look like and could or should look like? I mean, a healthy masculinity underneath a patriarchy is just a benevolent masculinity, which is, a benevolent patriarch, and I'm using that term from bell hooks. A benevolent patriarch. I mean, he's still a patriarch though. Like he's nice. He's kind. He's gentle. He can maybe communicate his emotions better, but he still is the governor of our lives. He's still, everything that he does goes. We still follow his lead. We still organize our lives around this singular individual because of their gender. That's not healthy at the end of the day. So it's really just about just rethinking healthy masculinity, or masculinity in general, before we're able to really answer that question like completely and comprehensively, or at least for me.
Sure. Yeah. I always love when we're out and I say something and you check me on my internalized patriarchy, that I think that we are so quick to put everything on men, even with that question, like, what is healthy masculinity? Well, it's still it's still masculinity under patriarchy, right? And I think that the same thing when we're talking about white supremacy. Like, there are absolutely people of color who perpetrate white supremacist ideology and keep it going. And when we start to think about all of the ways that, like, we internalize patriarchy, and everyone is perpetrating, patriarchal violence, it kind of makes it a collaborative. One, it gets rid of the gender, and two, it puts it on all of us to, tear down that system that is inherently there. So that is super interesting.
Yeah. And if I can add, I would also say, like, even though it is really important for, so whenever I always say we when I'm talking about these systems, because like it is us, it's easy for us to say, oh, society or this and that. And it's like, as if we're separate from it and we're not actively reproducing it in our day-to-day decisions every day. But I'll also say, like, under any kind of system of oppression, we can't necessarily give that responsibility to those who are being oppressed to then like shift and change and transform to change the system. Whatever internalized patriarchy or whatever allegiance that you may have to patriarchy is in response to surviving patriarchy, which is no fault of your own. That is the fault of patriarchy, which is run by men. So it's ultimately, it really comes down, it does come down to men. It comes down to them doing the work and showing up to do the work and doing the introspection and whatever that's necessary, coping mechanisms, the therapy, the behavior changes, the attitude changes. You know, as a woman, however you respond to patriarchy is very valid and reasonable. And I or no other man can tell you whether that's right or wrong, especially as a Black woman. It's very different for you too. Yeah. So I just wanted to put that in there also.
Thanks, Jay. You always keep me empowered, which is why you're my first guest. So if someone wants to start supporting the movement, someone is listening right now and they're like, oh my gosh, that's for me. That's the work I want to do. I want to know, what are the first steps that someone can take to get involved, both in their community and something that they can do to get involved, like personally in their personal life, something they can do, start right now?
Well, thank you for that question. We definitely want to get more people engaged. So I would say first things first, the obvious would just be plugging into your local organizations or local rape crisis centers that are doing this work already. There are probably some grassroots orgs that are focusing on this work in your community. There's likely to be a rape crisis center as well, especially in Ohio. We know that we have 32 of them to get involved with. Contacting them, seeing what volunteer opportunities that they have available. If you have some sort of experience already, maybe there's a position. If anything, maybe just trying to connect to see like, hey, I want to get involved with the field. Who can you network with me with? These are my interests. This is my resume. Maybe you don't have something here locally at this particular spot, but maybe you know someone I can talk to who might have the answer to that question. So I think that's a good place to definitely start. If you're on a college campus, and I'm not sure what this will look like during the era of COVID-19, but getting involved with some feminist or pro-feminist organizations, getting involved with organizations that are doing the work again, starting there is always good. And then I would say the second thing, or I guess the third thing, would be really just finding what it is that you care about. So if you want to get involved with this work and maybe like direct sexual violence or direct gender-based violence work, it's not really something you're interested in or passionate about, but you want to do something, a lot of the stuff is interconnected. It shows up everywhere. Everything shows up everywhere. If you're passionate about gun violence, that is passionate about sexual violence. A lot of our folks who are being abused or assaulted are done so under the threat of gun violence. Get involved with gun violence work. That can make a difference. If you care about housing or economic stability or food sovereignty, these things connect to sexual violence and connect to intimate partner violence. So even if you're not doing this work directly in this work, anything that you're involved in, if you pour yourself into it and you just show up and you do what you can, it's doing the work even still. We can't do all of that. We're limited because there's so much. So doing your part is doing your part, and we're all grateful.
Definitely. I know I wake up and I'm like, oh my gosh, there are so many problems in the world. Like, how am I going to solve them all? And I have to remember, like, if I can just dedicate my work to helping a part of that it's going to have a ripple effect and help with the bigger picture. So I'm gonna circle back to that question and ask about individually what men can do in their families, in their neighborhoods, what shifts they can make to be more pro-survivor.
I would say definitely introspection. Being reflective of your actions, of your behaviors, learning to take feedback. These things are very important to start with for day to day. I mean, I would definitely say that introspection is 100% super important. Like I do that every single day. I might be the engaging men coordinator. I might be thought of as like this expert on men and masculinities, but I am still a man. And so therefore, like I still have that internal struggle that I have to overcome things all of the time. And I'm sure I could, I mean, there's just a couple weeks ago, I just discovered that I have a little bit of predatory behavior when in my dating style. And I know these things, I can recognize these things on paper. If I were to see it and I were to hear it, I would be like, yes, that's predatory. But here I am doing it, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't even know that until I was having a conversation with women actually about their dating style and how radically different it was. It's like, wait a minute, that's way more straightforward and simple, and what I'm doing just is not it. So it's just like having those open conversations, that open dialogue, taking the feedback, and then critically reflecting, and then changing the behavior. That is what is important. Is when you see, once you know, you can't act like you don't know. And so move forward with that. Once you know, you can't act like you don't know. Um, yeah, I think that's just like that's the best place to start individually if we're talking about like being pro survivor for men. Um, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you so much. That makes so much sense because at the base of emotional and cultural intelligence is self-awareness. So, but then after you have that awareness, making that shift to change how you behave is really helpful. So thank you so much. Lots of good info. So is there anything else that you want to talk about or explain about like what you do?
I do quite a bit. I'm very busy. I do this work at the coalition level, but I'm also an organizer and an activist. Just am founding my own little organization with a couple of other organizers. I'm involved with a couple organizations. We have a few different things that are going on, so I'm always kind of involved with something, particularly around like racial justice, around uh, gender justice, environmental justice. Like I said at the beginning, those are kind of like where my passions are. So you can always find me doing something like that, reading a book or out and about working.
So what projects are you currently working on? What's coming up for you in Ohio?
Yeah, so we have a few exciting things that I'm working on. I'm always working on a lot. So I'll just probably name like a few major ones that I'm really, really hype about. So the first one is the Men of Color Caucus. The website actually just launched this week. So this is a caucus, is a support network to connect all the advocates who identify as men or identify as people of color um, to get together to create the support system. We're often isolated from one another. We often don't get to be in spaces with each other. So to create that space where we can all get together, to create that support, to ask questions, to build rapport and community, but also for professional development. I would love to we're going to create a mentorship program through the caucus. And also hopefully an engaging men forum where we can start engaging the community directly around questions and inquiries that men have in Ohio about being a man or about the movement or about what have you, that we're professionally able to answer. The idea for this caucus is generally to, again, to create that support network, but also to have a space to create new advocates. I think the number one thing as men in this field, our job is to create other men in this field. We need to do that self-awareness, that introspection, that understanding, hey, patriarchy is not it. We need to essentially, recruit other advocates in the field. So that's what this caucus is meant to do, particularly for men of color, and hopefully, we can start populating our rape crisis centers with well-trained, professionally developed men who can then able to serve male survivors in ways that maybe women are unable to do so. Um, so we have that great project that I'm working on with that. I'm also bringing a Call to Men. So if people aren't familiar, it's a national org around education and training around men and masculinity. Um, I am working on bringing that training to Ohio in early October. I am also working on OMAN, the Ohio Men's Action Network. I'm regional director currently. Um, I guess co-chair at the moment, but soon we'll be shifting to Southwest Regional Director. So we're doing a restructuring of that action network that will be, working in the different communities, the different regions, different counties, doing very intentional, engaging men work, whatever that may look like that is most relevant for the state or for those given communities. So those are like three main projects I'm working on right now. And there's always stuff in the background that I'm on to.
For sure. So we'll be sure to link, the website to Men of Color Caucus and the trainings if they're open to the public. That was kind of my follow-up question. Are these trainings open to folks other than men?
So that's a good question. I think as things grow, we probably will open them up to folks other than men. I think the professional development and the trainings that we're doing will probably be more so internal. Generally, because we're just trying to build that base for male advocates, for advocates who identify as men. Um, creating that space, right? It's about creating a fraternity. It's creating an institution that is an alternative to the current institution.
Starting it and building it from the ground up, that's really, really amazing. Yeah, again,
Build it, they will come.
Okay, I'm thinking of a few men I want to send your way for these trainings. That's why I asked. So, okay, now we're getting to my favorite part of Teal Talk, where we are going to do rapid fire. I'm going to ask you something, and you have no time at all. Just the first thing that comes to your mind.
Oh no, I'm
Answer.
nervous.
You'll do great. So, let's get started. So this is the Teal Talk. I want to know, what's your favorite shade of blue?
Cerulean.
Love it. I love that shade. What inspires you?
My brother and sister.
If we eradicated sexual violence tomorrow, what job would you take?
Oh, I would open up a plant store / bookstore.
In Cincinnati?
No.
Good. If you had a theme song, what would it be?
A theme song? Oh boy.
A song that played every time you walked into the room.
That's a good one. Long Live the Chief by Jindena.
Oh, nice. The first place you're traveling to, or first activity you want to do post-COVID?
I really want to go to the beach in Florida.
Okay. All right. What podcast are you listening to right now, other than Teal Talk?
I am actually not currently listening to any podcast. I just haven't. I think what I normally listen to is the Friend Zone, but I haven't listened to them in a while.
Love the Friend Zone. What is the best book you've ever read?
The best book I've ever read, In the Wake by Christina Sharp.
Thank you. Your favorite way to exercise?
Indoors.
Great. Your favorite Black-owned business to support in Ohio?
In all of Ohio?
Yeah.
That's not a fair question.
This is rapid fire, Jayvon.
All right. Well, Cincinnati, Just Qin Barbecue.
Nice. That sounds delicious. One word that comes to mind when I say gender justice.
Racial justice.
Thank you. That's it. That's my rapid fire. Did you like it? You did great.
I'm sweating.
I am too, actually. I was like,
really?
that was really intense. Yeah.
You didn't have to answer the questions. My turn.
I know.
I had ready
All
for
I
you
had to
to
do
go.
was ask.
Plot twist. I had rapid fire for you.
Okay, so my last question, most importantly, is where can people find you?
Well, you can find me. Feel free to send me an email. My email is jhoward@oaesv.org. You can also find me on Instagram. My Instagram is busterbug with two G's, BusterBugg. So those are places to find me. I'm pretty accessible.
Perfect. And we'll be sure to link all of this in the bio underneath. And thank you. If you have any questions about what me and Jay talked about today, go ahead and leave them in the comments. And then we will be looking at them this week. And next week, we will be answering those questions either live or via social for sure. We'll be following up. So if you have questions for Jayvon, if you have questions about intersectionality, anything that we talked about, go ahead and leave a comment and we'll be sure to get back with you all. So thanks again, Jayvon, for joining us.
Yes, thank you. This was fun. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Remember to put any questions that you all have like answered by me and my co-host in the questions box, and we'll talk to y'all next week. Thanks, y'all.